within the country, whether it was in business, local government, or the bureaucracy. And he basically took anyone in the country with intelligence and the capacity of forming an independent thought and exiled them, imprisoned them, intimidated them to silence, or just shot them. And there's now no one left. It's just Xi. And so no one wants to bring him information because you might get shot for that. Because you don't know the status of the conversation of the voices in his head. Right. And so we're seeing increasingly stupid decision-making from the very top with no one willing to challenge him. This is how you get that spy balloon, which is the dumbest thing I've seen a government do in 20 years. And if you think of the last 20 years, there's been a lot of dumb.
That's right.
This is how you get people disinfecting airport runways because they think that's what the leader wants. And we're seeing this in finance and in agriculture and manufacturing and in subsidies and across the governance space.
How does Taiwan fit into that entire situation?
Probably rhetoric. Now, when you decide, I mean, you're threatening Taiwan, saying we're going to integrate it forcibly if necessary, this does get popular support. People like the idea of one China because, you know, the Chinese are right. Throughout their history, when it hasn't all been in one piece, it's been a freaking disaster. And so there could be something to it, but I don't think so. So when you decide you're going to invade a country, you don't just like wake up and pull the trigger. You build your military with that goal in mind. And that means for years, sometimes for decades, you have to make certain assumptions about how you think the war is going to unfold. And what the Russians have provided for the Chinese is proof that the Chinese chose wrong on everything. Yep. So assumption number one, it's going to be an easy fight. Not as easy as invading Ukraine, because you can walk to Kiev, you have to swim to Taipei, but still easy. Well, clearly it wasn't all that easy. Number two, Russian weapons are awesome. So let's steal all their IP, just like we do for everything else, and spend $3 trillion manufacturing clones of those weapons for our crews. Well, they're having some serious buyer's remorse, or I guess it would be thieves' remorse.
Just remorse.
Yeah, thieves' remorse. Third, Russia's too important. We are too important. So if there is a war, everyone will just suck it up and make do. Oops. But I think what has really terrified the Chinese government is the boycotts. Because the sanctions hurt. There's no way around that. But the boycotts hurt a lot more, at least a factor of 4 more. And you had companies that had sunk in excess of $20 billion into Russia that just walked away. And the Chinese don't even have a concept for the idea of corporate or citizen agency, much less an understanding of what they would do if they lost access to foreign corporations, technology, and markets. That's an entire development model. So every guess they've made, they've guessed wrong. And they would be suicidal for them to now act because they also don't control the high seas. So they'd also lose all their manufacturers' exports, all their raw commodities imports, and all their energy. So best case scenario, where they capture Taiwan without firing a shot, they still deindustrialize and have a famine in under a year. You know, this is not a winning scenario here. Even the winning scenarios are awful. So normally I would say...
Bad news, you won.
Yeah, exactly. Normally I would say they wouldn't even consider it, but
right.
It's a one-man show.
Yeah.
And so it's entirely possible that Xi will pull the trigger, or some over-enthusiastic idiot bureaucrat will pull the trigger, not realizing the damage he's about to cause and cause the downfall of China as an industrial power. It's still possible. It's just not sane.
When you get to a system where there is no feedback loop, though, the insane becomes possible.
Right. And we've seen that in our country.
Yeah. Let's go into a meeting into which neither you nor I were invited. About a month ago, Tim Cook from Apple was in China, and there is obviously...
Awkward.
Right. There's obviously a drive amongst many companies, including Apple, to diversify their manufacturing out of China. Some are full bore pulling out, but a company like Apple that has so much of its manufacturing in China can cause some real mayhem within Apple.
Beyond painful. If it wasn't for a company with Apple's cash reserves, it would be a system-ending event.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of countries, a lot of companies have seen the writing on the wall for a while, and whether it was because of COVID disruptions or Trump or now the Biden subsidies, whatever it happened to be, the descent into narcissistic nationalism, people have been backing away. Labor costs are a big piece of that too, with different speeds from different starting points with different exposures. But The writing on the wall has been absorbed by everyone in the international business community, with the exception of Apple.
Yeah.
Now, about a year ago, Apple did start relocating, or maybe a year and a half ago now, did start relocating like the AirPods manufacturing to Vietnam. And that was the first thing, the first product that they had that they actually decided, maybe we shouldn't put it all in China. So they are the last company to come to the conclusion that there might be a problem.
Yeah.
Now, in Apple's defense, the very concept of globalization is underwritten by the American security order. And the Americans have never said flat out that they're done. It's just kind of been a bit by bit retreat. But now that it's more obvious, and now that the Biden administration is codifying Trump's policies, and now that labor costs in China are so high, and now that the Chinese government is actually criminalizing the act of owning data by private corporations, that's a new one this month. That was delicious. Apple is realizing that, maybe we shouldn't have 91% of our supply chain steps involved in China in some way. No matter how fast they relocate at this point, they can't get out fast enough, because an iPhone is a lot like a car, where if you miss one of those pieces, you just have a paperweight.
That's right.
But
exactly.
Most vehicles that are sold in the United States are 85% manufactured here. So getting the last few pieces, there's already a network effect going for you in the United States and Mexico, and to a lesser degree Canada. There's nothing like that with Apple. They're going to have to rebuild the entire ecosystem, and that is a minimum of 5 years.
Who do you think had the power in that conversation, though? Was it Xi, or was it Tim Cook?
It's hard to say that Xi has any power because of the lack of information. So he certainly has the authority to shut things down, but he can't necessarily do anything to help Tim Cook, because that means going against the demographic and strategic realities of the country, not to mention Xi's own personal aura. Cook says he would like to leave, but remember, we are now dealing with a Chinese leader who is a son of the Cultural Revolution. And if for the low, low price of a famine and strategic defeat and deindustrialization, he can retain power, he probably thinks that's okay. So the sort of leverage that Apple would normally have with a normal country just doesn't exist here. This was probably a conversation among people who were desperate in their own ways, who realized the person across the desk really couldn't do much to help them out.
Just the capacity for mayhem.
Yeah, and there's plenty of that.
Yeah, I have actually taken a drive from Hanoi to Halong Bay, and you go past the Foxconn facilities, and they are some of the largest buildings I have ever seen in my entire life. You're driving past them for minutes, and you can see exactly what is coming in an environment in which China is no longer a partner.
Yeah. Now there's one slightly less bad aspect